Hey guys, it's Miss Hall here with the last video for our first unit in Boost, and in today's video we're going to talk about strategies for reading fiction. When you read, there are all sorts of things that you do while you're reading. We talked about that at the beginning when we talked about making predictions about the book and previewing the book. These are things that you do in your mind. You don't have to necessarily practice them, but then there are some other strategies that you may not do, but that will help you to better understand the book if you do them. So in today's video, we're going to talk about all of those strategies. And so as we keep reading 13 Reasons Why, I want you to apply these different reading strategies. All right, the first strategy is one that we've already applied to 13 Reasons Why, and that's to preview the reading. And when you preview a book, you look at the front cover, the back cover, the first few pages. You're trying to judge if you're interested. Is this a book you care about reading? Is it a topic you're interested in? Does it look like it's well written? But you also do things like judge its readability. From the very beginning, you decide, is this book going to be too easy? Is it too hard? Or is this book just right? I sound like I'm reading from Goldilocks and the Three Bears there, but you know what I'm saying. Is this something that is going to be good for you to read? And then the last thing that you do is you make predictions. What is it going to be about? What's going to happen? You automatically do that in your head when you first get a book in your hands. The preview step is probably one of the easiest. The next strategy is another one that you probably do without even thinking about it. It's making connections. And you connect what you're reading to other experiences that you've had. It may be a text-to-text connection, meaning as you read it, you think, oh, I've read this something else like this, or even I've seen something else like this in a movie. A text doesn't have to be another book. It could be a movie, it could be a song, it could be a TV show. Any other media where you have seen a similar story would be a text-to-text connection. A text-to-self connection is when you can connect it to something that's happened to you. I've had an experience like this. I've felt like this. This has happened to me. That's text-to-self. And then there's text-to-world. And text-to-world is when you can connect what you're reading to things that you know are going on in the world around you. Things you see in the news. The general idea is that by making these connections, you're better able to understand the book. You can put yourself in the book and it's more relevant to you. And so some of those connections, again, you make naturally, but some of them you may have to stop and think about. And we'll do some of that with 13 Reasons Why. All right, the third strategy is identifying cause and effect. And as you read, again, you're doing this naturally. You're constantly identifying the relationship between an event and what happens as a result of that event. What was the cause and what was the effect? Sometimes the author directly tells you this. Because she did this, she got in trouble, but sometimes you have to figure it out. Why are her parents mad at her? Sometimes you have to go back and figure out the cause. Or what will happen when she stays out past her curfew. You might have to figure out the effect. If you don't understand why something happened in a story, go back and see if the cause is directly stated. If it's not, make a guess, make a prediction based on what you know and what your connection is, what previous experiences you've had. A lot of times part of cause and effect is making an inference. And an inference is something that, again, you automatically do, but sometimes you have to really stop and think about it. It's using a clue from the story to figure out something that's not directly stated. So if the author doesn't directly tell you cause and effect or about the characters or what's going to happen, you have to use your inferences. You have to think about it, make a guess. So if you look at the picture here of the boy in the broken window, if you just saw that picture, there's a lot of things you could infer. What's he looking at? How do you think he feels? What was the probable cause of the broken window? Who do you think did it? And what do you think is going to happen? So you can make a lot of inferences just based on this picture without even having any text. Now this last strategy is probably one of the hardest, and this is looking for those literary devices. And these are words you would not necessarily use in your day-to-day speech, but that you do need to know to use when you're talking about literature. And there's lots of different literary devices out there. I'm going to give you some of the most common. Dialogue, That's the conversation between characters. It's when the author uses quotation marks to tell you things that the characters are actually saying. This is important in characterization. It helps you figure out who the characters are just based on the language that they use. A character that's always angry, you would see that through the dialogue, through the words that they use. Another literary device is foreshadowing, and this is when the author gives you hints about what's going to happen. For example, at the beginning of 13 Reasons Why, when we hear that the teacher is going to be the last one to get the tapes, that's foreshadowing. It gives us a hint about what's going to happen later on. Another literary device, which you've already seen in 13 Reasons Why, is this idea of a flashback. And this is when the story goes back in time to a previous time in history. And almost everything that we're hearing from Hannah in the story is a flashback. We're going back in time and hearing about things that happened previously. Sometimes you also have a flash forward. It's when the story temporarily jumps forward to a time in the future. And 13 Reasons Why actually starts with a flash forward that shows us Clay dropping off the tapes, which is really sort of the end of the story. It's when that jumping forward to the future. So look for those: dialogue, foreshadowing, flashbacks, and flash forwards, not only in 13 Reasons Why, but in everything that you read. Some other literary devices that are very common are suspense and irony. And suspense is when the story contains that uncertainty or excitement. It's usually also accompanied by a little apprehension or anxiety. I think we're all seeing this in 13 Reasons Why. We're all wondering what's going to happen to Clay, what's Clay's part in the story. And we're uncertain, and we're also a little apprehensive. We're anxious for Clay. We want to know what part he played. The next, irony, is that contrast between what you expect to happen and the reality of the story. Now, there are three main types of irony that show up in literature. The first is dramatic irony. This is when the reader knows something that the character doesn't know. The authors told us that there's a scary monster lurking at the end of the street, and yet the character walking down the street doesn't know that it's there. That's dramatic irony. Verbal irony is saying one thing when meaning another, and this is something that characters do a lot. We often call it sarcasm. It's when the mom says, "Sure, honey, it's fine that you didn't get home by curfew," right before she grounds the student for the rest of her life. We know that she doesn't mean that it's fine. That's verbal irony. And situational irony is when what happens is very different from what's expected to happen. These are those things that really surprise you. So, for example, maybe something like a lifeguard drowning or a firehouse burning down. That could be situational irony. It's very different from what you would have expected to happen. Well, that's about it for strategies for reading fiction. As we read 13 Reasons Why, I want you to look for these different literary devices. I want you to work on making predictions and inferences and looking at cause and effect. And I think you'll find most all of them are applicable to 13 Reasons Why, but also to the rest of the things that we're going to read this year that are fiction. So keep these in the back of your mind. This is your toolbox for reading for the year. And make sure you can look back at these videos and review them if you need to, because these are really helpful strategies, and we'll work on them as a class as well as give you some chances to work on them individually with your reading. All right, have a great day.